Hey guys, Soph here. I'm making another video on like the basic rotation of the healers, and this one is for Disc Priest. Now I main Disc Priest, and I main Disc Priest the whole of BFA. And this spec is incredibly fun, and I've noticed that a lot of people tend to be re-rolling it for Shadowlands, so I'm going to do like a really basic rotation guide. Because a lot of people right now are making guides for the specs that are covering everything, but this is mainly just going to focus on your healing rotation and your damage rotation. Now, your main source of your Atonement Healing is in your Radiance and your shields. Now, whenever you apply a shield to a target, they get weakened soul, which means that you can't apply another shield to that target for 3 seconds. So you have to be really careful. If you're using your shields, you can't necessarily spam it. Nice, just died right there. Yeah, so when I am applying atonements to people, I tend to use my shield, because you can apply shields on the move. So like you can just chuck a shield on your group, and if you have to, atonement heal while you're, on the move, that's the quickest way. If you're standing still and you plan to stand still, you can use Radiance if you need that little bit of extra healing to apply your atonements. But I primarily tend to use shield just because I value the shield that it gives, instead of like Radiance just gives the atonement plus a heal when it is when you use it. But in terms of shields, I want to talk about Rapture, because there are a lot of Disc Priests that I've run with recently since I started playing Shadow that don't tend to press Rapture. Now, Rapture is probably your best healing spell, or your best healing cooldown that you have. Now, Rapture applies huge absorb shields to your group, and it's on a 1.5 minute cooldown, so it is up incredibly often. So I tend to use Rapture almost on CD. I'd say almost on CD, but I also know what kind of packs currently in BFA. Shadowlands will be a bit different, but I know what kind of packs are particularly dangerous. But yeah, again, you can't just Rapture spam one target. It still applies weaken soul, so you still have that downtime where you can't apply another shield at the target. Now, then we're going to probably talk about, I would say Penance, because Penance is your biggest tank CD. Now, Penance is an incredibly powerful CD. I tend to like to know the tank that I'm running with, because it's like a 3 minute CD, right? So you really only want to be pressing it when you really need that defensive. So I tend to like to be able to communicate with my tank as to when they want Penance up. But if you don't have Discord or you don't know your tank very well, I would try to get a feel of the dungeons, because Disc relies heavily on you knowing what packs do what kind of damage. Because you need to stay ahead of the damage with Disc, because if you get behind, it is incredibly hard to catch up. So you need to kind of be aware of, okay, this pack does, quite a lot of tank damage, and okay, this one does quite a lot of AoE, so I need to have, my shields, I need to have Rapture, I need to have Barrier for this. You need to save your Penance up for any particular tank healing that you might need. And you need to know whether you can use your Penance offensively or defensively, which again makes it easier if you know how much damage these packs are doing. Now, for instance, this pack, the champion, hits really hard on the tank, so I'm well aware that I need to be watching my tank. These don't tend to do any AoE, so it's like knowing these little things that help you play Disc better, because honestly, the more you know about the damage, the easier it is for you to actually play the spec. So yeah. Also, Penance, again, I should talk about, is because it can be used, on your teammates as a heal, or you can use it offensively and do damage to the target. Now, again, you need to kind of get a feel for your tank, because I tend to use Penance offensively almost all the time. But if I need that little bit extra, I tend to, use Penance on my tank. I prefer it for the damage to help my Atonement Healing for my AoE. But it is a really nice healing spell if your tank just needs a little top up, between your shields or whatever. Now I'm going to talk about your Atonement Healing. The more damage you do, the higher your Atonement Healing is. So when you have, let's say you've pressed power with Radiance, or, you have you've got shields on your entire group, you want to absolutely pump in that atonement window that you have. So like if you're running Schism, you want to Schism a target, probably the most dangerous target in the pack, if you know which one that is. So you're going to Schism, then you're probably going to Penance the target, you're going to Solace the target, you're going to make sure you have your dots on at all times. I'll talk about your damage rotation, but a lot of your AoE healing comes from the amount of damage you do in your atonement window, right? And if you need a little bit extra, that's when you put your barrier down, you pop Rapture. As you can see in this KR, I tend to be popping barrier and Rapture almost on CD because these packs hit really hard. And you don't have a lot of ways to help your tank kite, so you need to make up for that in smart CD usage. So yeah, it is just, it's all knowledge. Disc is not really a spec that you can kind of just pick up and then go willy-nilly into a key. It takes a lot of pre-planning and like figuring out the best ways for you to do as much damage as possible. So yeah, barrier again. Barrier is a weird spell. Man, my tank fell over right there. I tend to not use it a lot because I tend to use it if like I know my group is gonna take lots and lots of damage, which is kind of a bad thing because sometimes you just don't have a barrier pull. Like sometimes I'll go like 10 minutes without having used barrier. But I want to try to say, like, if you know that a pull is going to be super heavy on the tank, I tend to use it to help my tank. Because your AoE healing with Rapture is pretty decent. So, like, if your tank's maybe going to get railed, or maybe your melee are going to get hit by cleaves, that's when I tend to use barrier. Just to help them in particular. Because most of the time your ranged are kind of out of damage, just like out of harm's way. There's not like a swirling tornado or some frontal cleave or something. So like on those particularly difficult packs, I tend to suggest using barrier at that point. So yeah, I guess we'll talk a little bit about your damage rotation because pretty much your entire, healing rotation relies on how much damage you can do. Now, for instance, on this boss, I'm not running Schism, so we're going to talk about the talent tree after this. But if you want to do maximum damage, I tend to suggest running Schism. Now, in this key, it's a high fortified KR, and I really need Twist of Fate. I need that I need that healing buff when targets are at low HP and I heal them, because a lot of the time in this dungeon, people are at low HP. So I get the Twist of Fate damage buff and the Twist of Fate healing buff when I'm healing lower targets. But anyway, so your single target rotation, let's say you're running Schism, you're going to put Schism, you're probably going to have Purge the Wicked first, because you always want to have your dots. So if you're not running Purge the Wicked, and instead you're running like Divine Star, so you have Shadow Word Pain instead, make sure you have everything dotted at all times. Every mob in the pull, make sure the boss, maybe the boss has, got 3 different parts, like 3 different bosses, like Triad, for instance. Make sure you have your dot on all 3 targets, or however many targets there are. So you're going to have your dot on the target, so then you're going to press Schism, then you're probably going to Penance, Solace, Mind Blast, Shadow Word Death when it's at high HP, your Shadow Fiend is going to be out, then you're probably going to get into the Smite spam. Once you've used everything in your Schism window, you pretty much are just going to start Smite spamming. Now, you can use your whole CD on pull, but I tend to save. I didn't use my Shadow Fiend at all in that boss. That's crazy. I tend to save my big crank AoE either at the start of the pull. I use it just while I'm in my pot window, I'm in lust window, I'm in whatever, my troll racial if I'm a troll. But sometimes I save my Shadow Fiend for really heavy damage. Like if I have multiple targets taking lots and lots and lots of damage, like maybe we'll talk about Triad for instance. There is one witch who does significantly more AoE than the other, which is the second one, in my opinion. I tend to save my Shadow Fiend for her in particular. So it's, again, as I said, it's about knowing what kind of damage. Like you could pop your Shadow Fiend on pull, pop Schism, you've got your pot running, Penance is gone onto the target, Solace is gone. You use Shadow Word Death at the start of the pull, you're going to use it at the end as an execute. Mind Blast is out. You kind of, okay, yep, you've shot up the meter. Good for you. But then you're going to go, wait a second, it's a boss fight, and there's probably going to be some heavy AoE. And having your Shadow Fiend or Light Spawn, whatever it is, it changes with the glyph, is so important for heavy AoE. Because again, as I said, maximizing your damage in these heavy AoE windows means that you have an easier time keeping your group ahead of the damage. You never want to be, man, I think a one shot. You never ever want to be behind. So like for instance, we're gonna see here in a minute, one of these groups of mobs does Axe Barrage. Now you need to have your shields before Axe Barrage starts and have, you know, your atonements. You don't want to like let the damage happen and then atonement heal them up. You need to have your atonements on and ready to go for when you start that damage window. For like, you want your atonements out, press Schism, pump into the target, your group's HP is up. Like obviously you're not always going to be ahead, but I'm just saying when you know the damage is coming, be prepared for the damage. So, you know, like press Rapture right before the damage. Get those Rapture shields on, so when the damage is coming, it's coming through that it's hitting that Rapture shield, not, you know, you're just shielding low HP. Now with Rapture, as I said, you get Weakened Soul. You have that 3-second window where you can't, you know, shield the target again. Make sure with Rapture, you know, you've got your shield. They're probably going to take damage in that 3 seconds, and after it's off, like on my voodoo frames, you'll see the image right there. I think a Weakened Soul is longer than 3 seconds now I'm looking at it. But as soon as it's gone, shield goes back on the target. I think I've been saying it's 3 seconds and it's slightly longer. But anyway, again, I don't know it off the top of my head, but my voodoo frames tend to track it for me. So yeah, they're 5 seconds. And then you'll see the image goes down, then I can shield my tank again. So that's the thing. Just, I have a tracker for it on my frames, and if you are a healer, I tend to try to track it so you can see when you can put it back on, so you don't end up just overlapping, if that makes any sense. So yeah, so I just want to say, if you're not running Schism, you do lose out a little bit of that, you know, bursty DPS that you could be doing. But I tend to run like for instance, I'm running Twist of Fate in this dungeon. If you don't know your tank, you don't know the dungeon, and maybe you're a little bit worried about the dungeon, I tend to choose Twist of Fate. I'll talk about the talents, but I keep mentioning Schism because I tend to run Schism when I'm really comfortable. Like when I know the dungeon, I know the group, I know what kind of, you know, damage things do. It's a lot easier to run Schism because you don't lose that, you know, defensive, it's not really a defensive, but you get that extra healing. Okay, so as you can see here, Axe Barrage has come out. I shielded myself before, and now I've used Rapture. So I tried to shield myself from that first tick, because it's honestly always that first tick. If you can get ahead of the first tick of whatever the damage is, you're totally fine. But if you're not ahead of the first tick, you just can't. It's just harder to catch up. Okay, so we've got it on 3 people here. Shields are out. Now I'm pressing Shadow Mend as a filler, and everyone seems to be okay. Now, people might be wondering, how have we gone without talking about Shadow Mend? I don't tend to want to encourage people to get into a Shadow Mend spam, because it's honestly the hardest way to heal a group is like spamming Shadow Mend. Because for one, they take the damage back over 10 seconds, again, as you can see it on my frames. But it's also not a great habit to get into, because you're gonna really quickly, and it's not a particularly like it's not regrowth, for instance. So when you press Shadow Mend, you want to be pressing Shadow Mend as a filler. So like maybe you don't have Rapture, maybe like maybe you don't have Barrier, or you know, you're in that Weakened Soul window. That's when you want to be pressing Shadow Mend, because like, I see a lot of disc players who just spam Shadow Mend, go extremely fast, and then wonder why, like, their healing as disc is non-existent. That's because you never want to rely on Shadow Mend to heal your group. Like, you don't want to get stuck in a Shadow Mend spam, ever. So, I want to get it through everybody's heads who's listening to this. Please use Shadow Mend as a filler. Like, if you're, you know, let's say your mage is at half HP, you're like, okay, he might take damage, I'm gonna put shield on him, he's still at half HP. Where, you know, maybe going to a new pack, or, you know, he's lower than he should be. Instead of waiting to Atonement heal him up if you think he's in danger, just press Shadow Mend. Just top them up. But if you know that they're not gonna take any, like, very harmful damage, like, let's say they're at half HP, you're going from pack A to pack B, and they're at half HP, pop a shield on them, and then Atonement heal them through the pack. But if you're like, oh, there is a lot of frontal cleave, you know, use Shadow Mend, top them up, and then away you go. But yeah, it just, please use it as a filler, because I don't want people going like, oh, you know, she said I could use it, and like, it's just not it's not the best way to heal with disc. With disc, it's a lot about knowing your playstyle, knowing the dungeons, and maximizing your DPS that you can potentially do. But yeah, that's pretty much kind of the whole breakdown for disc. I guess we'll talk about the talents, because some of the talents are a little bit different here. Let's see. Okay, so for the talents, we've got Twisted Fate and Schism. As I said, I tend to like running Schism when I know my group. Short CD makes you do extra damage. As you can see, increases your spell damage by 25% for 9 seconds. So it just, you know, gives you a bigger burst during your window. Then we have Twisted Fate. After healing a target below 35%, you deal 20% increased damage and 20% increased healing for 10 seconds. Now, some dungeons, people don't tend to get this low. Like, some dungeons, people don't tend to get below 35%. It's dungeons, like, for instance, talking about BFA dungeons is kind of pointless right now because we're about to go to Shadowlands. But for example, dungeons like King's Rest, Temple, Shrine, maybe a Motherlode, people tend to be below 35%. But it's kind of dungeons like Freehold, maybe Underrot. There's not a lot of packs or like bosses that are really dangerous. So you can get away with running Schism. But like, if you don't know, like, as I said to people, if you don't know the dungeons, you don't know how much damage they do, you don't know your group, maybe you've got someone in your group who's maybe lower eye level, maybe less gear, and you know, you think like they might need it, I tend to run Twisted Fate just to be safe, because that 20% increased healing for 10 seconds is incredibly powerful. Especially if it's a really heavy AoE dungeon, like for instance, Sanguine Depths. Some of these bosses do crazy amounts of AoE and your team is really low, and that 20% increased healing, like over your targets, is just incredibly powerful. So I wouldn't sleep on Twisted Fate. But again, if you want to be a big bursty healer, probably play Schism. This tree is interesting. I used to run Masochism in dungeons like Temple of Sethralis, because I didn't need a whole lot of movement, and when you cast Shadow Mend on yourself, its damage over time effect heals you instead, and reduces the damage you take by 10%. So like, I used to run this in like Temple, or sometimes KR, like high KR, and it's a nice like ability to give you more tankiness, is the best way to put it. I don't tend to run it ever, or at least not very often anymore, because I value having movement, because Priest lacks movement. So without Feather or Body and Soul, you don't have any way to get out of things quickly. And like Druids and Shamans like Ghost Wolf and Cat Form and help you, you know, navigate your way around these, you know, things that you have to dodge. Disc doesn't have anything like that, so I rely heavily on Feather. I don't tend to run Body and Soul, because Feather, like, I like to use for my tank, or if I put it down for someone to catch up. Like, if I can't life grip them, per se, I'll put down some feathers. Again, you can body and soul in for 3 seconds or 40% faster, but I just find that feather is better when I'm navigating the dungeons. It's probably more personal preference in that row. Now, in this tree, I'm either running Solace or Mindbender. I experimented with Mindbender a lot, but I've always run Solace, and it makes more sense to me in my damage window. Like if I have my light spawn out and my Solace, and I'm using Solace on CD, I feel like my damage window makes more sense. Maybe because there's more buttons to press, but like this one again, I think is more personal preference because it's like a mana regen at the end of the day. But this one like gives you mana back every time he attacks, and he's on a 1 minute CD. This guy's on a 3 minute CD. But Solace is up every 11 seconds. So this one I think is more personal preference. So I probably won't say I run both, but it just depends really. In this tree I kind of always run Shining Force so that I can manhandle my ads a little bit better for my tank. Like if ads are, you know, certain things are coming in that I don't want, I can knock them back and it slows them. I don't know, it just, again, it's good for necrotic. It's good for like freehold ad. Obviously we're not going to be doing freehold anymore, but like when that ad is coming in, I could knock it back. I don't know if there's anything like that in Shadowlands, like bosses that need an ad to be knocked away or something, but I just like having the more control I can have as a healer. Means it's easier if my pug group doesn't kick or stun stuff. It gives me more options to control the ads how I want. I always run Sins of the Many here. I messed around with Shadow Covenant, but I don't love it at the moment. So you could potentially play like either of the two, but like this one here, I never run. When you heal with Penance, everyone with your Atonement is healed for 95. I never ever tend to heal with Penance unless I'm healing my tank for some reason. So it tends to be a toss-up between Shadow Covenant and Sins of the Many. But I don't really like the new Shadow Covenant all that much. And it's kind of annoying to, you know, like be holy locked essentially while you're in your Shadow Cov window. So I tend to just run Sins of the Many. This tree, as I said, you like some people like to run Divine Star and have Shadowwood Pain. I tend to prefer Purge the Wicked because it does more damage. But I used to run Divine Star when I was first learning Disc because it just gave me something to fall back on, like an extra heal. So like maybe if you're learning Disc and you're a little bit worried you don't know how to Atonement heal well and you don't want to get stuck into like a Shadowman spam, maybe run Divine Star if you need that little bit extra healing. But as I said in my holy video, please be careful. It will pull everything. Like you might shoot it in a straight line, but it will pull who knows what from every direction. It's like a little cone that it goes in is not accurate at all. So please be careful if you are running this tree. Now, this one tends to never change. Lenience reduces, Atonement reduces damage taken by 3%. When you have shields on almost everyone at most times, that, you know, DR is like the best thing you could ever want in M+. So these two are just kind of whatever. But this tree is pretty normal for me. The only ones that would change is Mindbender and Schism. But yeah, I guess I should probably talk about Mindseer, because a lot of people have said to me like, oh, I press Holy Nova over Mindseer. Please don't. Mindseer is fantastic. It does great AoE. Put Purge the Wicked, like or Shadowwood Pain, whatever you're running, depending on this tree. Put that on all your targets, and then press Mindseer. You are doing great AoE damage, and it does great Atonement healing too. So, yeah. Also, I should probably talk about Mind Blast. Mind Blast prevents damage that mob that you've put it on does to other people, but that doesn't mean that when you're in your damage window you can't press it, because it still does 637 damage. So when you're in your Schism window, you're preventing the damage it deals, but also yeah, pretty much use it on CD because you can use it for the damage. And as I said earlier, with Shadow Word Death, I tend to press it at the start of a pull on a mom, but make sure that you always have it up as an execute because it does that 150% more damage to targets below 20%. Yeah, that's kind of been all for Priest. Like, also Master Spell's incredibly strong. Everybody knows you can Master Spell Bursting, you can Master Spell lots of different things, so please use your Master Spell. I hope you all have some kind of tracker on your frames to show you what you can and can't Master Spell, because it's such an incredibly powerful spell that you want to use it whenever you can, especially during bursting weeks, and it's incredibly strong during bursting. And I'll finish off by saying I love life grip. I love life gripping my friends to the edge of things and hoping that they walk off. But also, I want to say to everybody, try to use life grip to help your tank kite. You do not need to stand next to your tank at all times unless maybe you're helping, like maybe you're really tanky and you're trying to bait something to hit you instead of like all of it going onto your tank or all of it going onto your melee. But if, you know, during the Necrotic or maybe particularly heavy AoE packs, try and stand back a bit and maybe grip your tank if he needs to kite, and then he can just run away and you guys can slow the ads or you can knock them back or whatever. So try to use good life grip again to help your tank, because Penance Up is 3 minutes CD. So like when you don't have Penance Up, you don't, or barrier, you don't have a lot to help the tank because you've only got Rapture and Shadow Mend at that point. So try to use your Shining Force, your grips, you know, your Psychic Fear to help your tank. But at the end of the day, Disc, I think, has the highest skill cap. So you want to be super careful and make sure that you know what you're doing, because Disc is incredibly hard. As I said, if you get behind, it's really hard to catch up. And if you don't know the dungeons, you don't know the class very well, the class is going to feel way harder than it actually is. So if you can do a little bit of research of the dungeons, maybe before you go in there, it's going to help the way that you play, like, significantly. I can't begin to tell you. Because the more that you know, the easier the class is. But yeah, I mean, Disc is so fun to play. I don't be daunted. I know this video is a lot longer than my normal ones. And that's because it is my main spec. But yeah, kind of play it how you want, but just please, 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 I don't want you guys to get in the habit of being a Shadow Mend spammer whenever there is AoE damage. Please use it as a filler, or if you think you can't Atonement Heal someone back up before they die because they've stood in something. But yeah, that's kind of all from me for this video, so I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day or night, and I will see you in Shadowlands. Bye!